Get a life. How often do you hear that anymore? Remember, like, over 20 years ago when Get a Life was in circulation and people used to say it all the time to people who just were either wasting their time or just as a way of being an asshat? See, I don't want to be one of those fools who's like, oh, because they don't say it anymore, people have gotten soft. No, now, there's still plenty of euphemistic and insulting phrases out there that people use. What I'm more concerned with is the idea of what it means. Because get a life implies there's a societal standard for how one ought to conduct their life. And if at the end of the day a person feels happy because of the fact that they are able to upload content, create memes, or create music videos, or just whatever else they do in order to broadcast themselves and to make their reputation known to the world, why would you shoot them down with something as harmful as Get a Life? Because the harm here implying that they will, depending on how seriously they take your statement, be convinced that what they have to do to chip in is of no merit or value. Now, frankly, the way I've seen it addressed to people before could be considered in a somewhat helpful light. Whenever you see someone tell a person who only uploads videos of them advertising just new events hosted by their community or just what they're going to be doing with their time the next few days. See, that could be a call for them to improve themselves. However, the issue there lies in the fact that what they're doing could be considered productive and helpful to their audience if looked at in the right light. See, once you add perspective and nuance to everyday assumptions, their truth becomes only partial. It's not the whole truth, meaning that depending on the circumstance, depending on the place, what is considered to be a universal truth can suddenly be flipped on its head. Obviously, there's such a thing as facts, but sometimes what is factual in one situation, in another situation, will be the consequence of things acting on potentiates that are relatively unclear to the observer. Now, I'm not suggesting that this means that we ought to quit washing our hands because sanitization is bad for our health. I'm not suggesting that we ought to quit eating healthy foods and just go full on junk because there's no point in prolonging our lives. And also, I'm not suggesting that we ought to limit our moral compass to include only people that we are concerned for and feel would benefit most from our moral compass. Because everyone is on a journey and because everyone has a different perspective, the moment you decide that you need to let someone in on your facts is the moment you have decided you're going to wage an all-out war with this particular individual. Now, what I mean by that, and just to clarify, I'm not talking about just being at odds for the sake of being a jerk. I'm talking about even if you have the best intentions, the other person is going to see that as a challenge. Now, where this comes particularly strong for me is the idea that I have never been a very conscientious, well thought out person. And therefore, people will often use my weaknesses to their advantage. Of course, I'm not saying that's always the case, but in the cases that it is, it's the exact same thing when you decide to tell a person who is dead set in their convictions, you are wrong, and everything that you've been taught about this is incorrect. But do you see why that's wrong? Because the 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 problem lies in the assumption. Whenever you assume that the person should know something already, or that they should listen to you because you're a credible source, and yet you just walked into their life like maybe 40 seconds ago, right? It's like they aren't going to probably take you remotely seriously. Now, my uploads will never follow a linear path. And the reason for this is my mind is all over the place, and my conscious tends to zoom in and out on what could potentially be interesting topics from a subjective framework. Now, you've heard me mention this before several times, but like because of the fact that I have difficulty communicating and have difficulty knowing how to set up a proper video, I therefore can jump to conclusions too quickly about what is worth uploading and what's not. Fine, no harm done, but it's always worth consideration, like knowing how and what you want to upload before you do it. And the reason why I still choose to upload is because I need an outlet and I need a haven of safety to be able to like both broadcast myself and feel like I am taking my life in a direction, a worthy direction. Because you truly never know when some random motherfucker is just gonna click on a video like this and be like, huh, I actually benefit from the content. Not saying that's necessarily going to be the case with mine, but there's always a place to start, basically. Now, I will say that when it comes to developing more productive habits, routines, and developing the essential skills to be able to approach a task more intuitively, I don't always have the energy or the desire to pull off such a feat. I think oftentimes it's so easy to take into account the side of humanity that tells us one thing while excluding other conflicting perspectives that could be just as, if not more important. Because anyone can listen to things that confirm their biases and be like, oh yeah, I told you so. But once something flips it on its head and you begin to realize there's a conflict of interest between what someone on one end of the spectrum is telling you that you really respect and admire, and then another person you may not respect and admire that much up and flips that other person's beliefs on their head, and you're able to see it as relevant. Relevant doesn't always equal factual, but if you're the type of person like me who can just listen to random people speak and feel the power and the realness of the subject material, it can be so hard to say to yourself, maybe I ought to not take this person so seriously all the time. I don't like the fact that I'm like this. I don't like the fact that I constantly doubt and that my mind is always full of questions. Yet I also know that the key to a productive lifestyle is to essentially make peace with the things that you feel drag you down. Like when you feel like the going is so rough and you're not actually able to find the means or the headspace to be able to deal with it, being able to wrestle with that and be able to be in the moment and say to yourself, what is missing here? And what benefit can I derive from it, is always so much more life giving than just deciding that your problems deserve to be forgotten or they deserve to be overlooked. Because overlooking them is just another way of saying they're not even real. I always like being there for people. I always like being able to show a person kindness out of the pure, raw understanding that where they are right now is probably rough and they could use someone to like let them know, hey, life doesn't have to suck so much. And the more I do that and the more I am able to chip in, it really does give a sense of like just awe and wonder at like what just a couple of seconds can do for a person. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm able to meet as many people where they're at as I'd like, but it does mean that I am willing, given the circumstance, to at least entertain the thought and then try to act on it. Because for the most part, it really is hard to get involved. It is hard to open yourself up to a person and at the same time hope that they won't deride your involvement in their lives. Because so many people are just standoffish and like to have everything together, which is why, you know, it's another pick your battles type situation when it comes to helping a person through something. Now, granted, it does involve some sort of risk. So many things in life involve risk. Like deciding to eat healthy carries a lot of risk because it means that if you start to pick up momentum and you are able to actually get yourself into a healthy routine, fine. But what happens when you have just that little bit of dessert each week? If you're like me, I eat it like 2, 3 times over the next following days. That's not the type of diet regime that actually is conducive to getting into a healthier, established routine. I know that my stream of consciousness goes against the established procedures of how to correctly speak one's mind in video format. But, it's like there's only so much you can do when your mind and your life is running on empty and it feels like there's no stable outlet for you to actually be involved in a way that you know is virtuous. Now, granted, even if it's something small, sometimes people can be happy with very little. I often find that I am able to be happy with little. The issue therein lies the fact that even if you are happy with little, does it matter at the end of the day? Does it matter and is it helpful to other people to see where you're at and that you don't have an issue with it? I feel like I overthink things to the point where my rational mind no longer has a grasp on a situation. And once I find myself in that pit of despair of like, oh man, there's no hope for me, that's where the real depression kicks in. When I feel like my efforts and my time don't actually matter and that I won't actually add up because at the end of the day, I am looking for a reason to continue living, a reason to continue finding peace with my present and not being so agitated that things don't add up the way I'd like them to. Because so many people around me hide insecurities in virtually the same way I do, where I look all just wonderful and polished on the outside and like I've been getting around, but it's all masks, it's all protection we use to defend our egos and our vulnerabilities and our state of mind that is just out of whack with what people yearn for. And also, living in the Midwest and the Missouri Ozarks doesn't help a whole lot, too, because people here are full of biases and lack education in some of the worst ways. And I've seen firsthand just how standoffish people can be about their way or the highway when it comes to information. And anytime you offer alternate perspectives, you always hope that there will be at least one person you'll be able to stick the landing with. But I'm just scared to communicate with a lot of people because I don't like the idea of my own ego being crushed and destroyed. See, so it really is a two-way street there. And you know, with everything going on about the election and all of Trump's decisions, it's like I don't really care enough anymore to actually try to reverse the status quo or to try to chip in a very small amount like only I can do because no matter what you do in an administration, a political administration, the people in charge, the higher ups are already in power. And even if you sign ballots or petitions against a certain move, it's not likely going to do a whole lot. Now, I'm not saying it can't, but I'm also not saying that it will. Because, the more that I've been dealt in life, the more that I've observed, the more I've realized I don't really have much control. I don't really have a lot of just support or words of wisdom and guidance to give people. Now, paradoxically, one could argue that because I'm saying that right now in the way I am, it takes self awareness to be able to admit that. But I'm really not admitting to anything that society would view as helpful, at least the more constructive, remedial side of society that looks at people like me and says, "Oh, you're giving yourself crap." But yeah, it can be damaging to your health, to have that mindset too long. And it's one of the reasons why I have tried to at least cultivate a more serious and at the same time structured way of going about my habits and routines in order to be able to get the most out of life that I can and to be able to synthesize information in a way that's helpful for me and can help me gain skills. But skill building is no easy feat. Most people will tell you that the number of skills they have versus the ones that they've tried to develop is probably much more minimal. And just knowing that it should be inspiring at least to know that you don't have to get it right all the time, but that effort does require some deal of discomfort. And once you sit in that discomfort and are able to be mindful about it, that's all you really need to be able to actually foster the type of growth patterns you're keep telling yourself you want. I don't really know how to construct adequate analogies to describe the situations and experiences I have. I feel like if it did, it would help more people understand where I'm coming from and also just the subject material I talk about a lot better. But, just letting them stew in vagueness isn't always helpful to the audience. But, I just really enjoy reading. I really enjoy finding ways to improve life in small ways. But, I often wonder if I am, misguided. There's always a part of me that feels out of place and out of touch with what my actual potential dictates and what I have going for me says about what can be realized in myself as an individual. And like the only way you can really figure that out is to tamper with random things, with random scenarios and thought patterns, and to see how far your influence can go before it starts to break down and you need to start over. So, yeah, real heady information.